When nature strikes back, there's nowhere to hide, not even above ground or behind steel. From grizzlies ripping through tents to boars charging rivers and crocodiles exploding from the mud, these hunters face the wild at its rawest. Every step, every sound could mean survival or death. Mountains, rivers, and frozen plains became arenas where instinct ruled and hesitation killed. These aren't just hunting stories. They're reminders that in the wild, the hunter's control is only an illusion. Watch till the end to see how quickly power shifts when nature decides to fight back. It was September 15th, 2025 in the rugged backcountry of northern Montana, close to the Canadian border where dense pine forests met the wide, stony river valleys. The evening air was cold and still. The only sounds were flowing water and the distant calls of night birds. Three hunters, Ryan Caldwell, Derek Shaw, and Marcus Hale, had traveled deep into bear country for a late-season scouting trip. Each carried a Ruger Hawkeye .338 rifle, sharp field knives, and enough gear to last several nights. Their goal was to track signs of grizzlies and prepare for the upcoming hunting season. Ryan, 43, was a skilled outdoorsman who had hunted since childhood. He owned a small outfitting business and spent much of his time guiding others through rough terrain. Derek, 45, worked as a forestry ranger and had joined the trip for the challenge. Marcus, 39, was the youngest, an experienced tracker who handled logistics and camp setup. The three men respected nature but also trusted their experience and equipment. They had spent the day following claw marks along tree trunks and collecting photos of fresh tracks pressed into the soft soil near the riverbank. As dusk settled, they found a flat clearing beside a small river, surrounded by spruce and willow trees. The water glimmered under the fading sunlight, and the air carried the scent of wet moss and pine resin. They parked their truck near the shore and began setting up camp. Ryan unfolded the rooftop tent attached to the truck's frame, while Marcus and Derek gathered firewood and prepared their supplies. They hung small cuts of game meat from nearby branches, hoping the smell would attract bears overnight. It was part of their plan to observe feeding behavior for future scouting. By midnight, the forest had fallen silent except for the sound of the river and the flicker of their dying campfire. The men climbed into the tent above the truck's roof, closing the canvas flap against the chill. The stars were hidden behind thin clouds. The scent of meat drifted faintly through the air, mixing with the smoke. Around 12:40 a.m., the quiet was broken by a deep rustling from the woods. A massive grizzly stepped out from the darkness, its fur glistening under the pale moonlight. It had followed the scent trail straight to the camp. The animal moved slowly at first, sniffing the ground, its breath visible in the cold air. The grizzly reached the truck and rose on its hind legs, towering over the vehicle. With a heavy swing, it crashed down onto the roof, shaking the frame. The impact crushed the canvas walls, metal groaning under its weight. Inside, Ryan and Derek barely had time to react before the claws ripped through fabric and steel. The bear roared, smashing the tent and hurling one of them to the ground as Marcus scrambled for his rifle. Marcus stumbled backward as the massive grizzly roared again, shaking the truck with every strike. The steel roof buckled inward, and the torn canvas flapped violently in the cold wind. Ryan and Derek were trapped inside, unable to escape the crushing force. The bear's claws slashed through the fabric, hitting everything in reach. Marcus grabbed his rifle, his hands trembling as he tried to steady his aim, but the chaos made it impossible. The sound of tearing metal and breaking glass filled the air, mixing with the deep growls that echoed through the dark forest. For a few seconds, the bear paused, sniffing the air, its fur shining with dew under the faint moonlight. Then, without warning, it turned sharply and dropped back to the ground. It sniffed around the truck's tires and the pile of camping gear nearby. The scent of baited meat had vanished into the wet air, and the animal's attention began to fade. With one final snort, it lumbered back into the forest, disappearing between the trees. The only thing left behind was the crushed tent and the stillness of the night. Marcus rushed toward the truck, his boots slipping on the damp soil. His flashlight beam cut through the shredded tent, revealing a scene of horror. Both of his friends lay motionless among the twisted canvas and broken poles. The air smelled of fuel, blood, and damp earth. The sound of the river nearby seemed distant and unreal. Marcus's heart pounded as he realized what had happened. He checked for movement, but there was none. He stayed beside the wrecked truck until the forest began to lighten with the first signs of dawn. At sunrise, Marcus packed what little gear remained and started the long walk back toward the nearest ranger outpost, several miles away. His clothes were torn, his hands raw from cold and shock. When rescuers finally reached the site, they found the truck's roof caved in, deep claw marks carved into the metal, and the remains of the rooftop tents scattered across the clearing. Authorities confirmed that the Grizzly had likely followed the smell of meat from far away. Experts later explained that even the smallest amount of food scent could draw such predators for miles. The tragedy became a warning for all hunters and campers in the region. New safety notices were placed along trailheads, reminding travelers to store bait and game far from sleeping areas. Marcus never returned to that part of the wilderness. The memory of that night stayed with him forever. The sound of the claws, the shaking metal, and the quiet that followed. It became one more story in the long history of how nature's power demands respect and caution. It was October 29, 2022, deep in the misty southeastern corner of Poland's Bieszczady Mountains, where the hills rolled endlessly beneath a pale gray sky. The cold air carried the sharp scent of pine and wet soil, and the ground was slick with fallen leaves and mud. Emil Kowalski, a 38-year-old hunter from Krakow, had spent years exploring these wild forests. He worked as a forestry ranger and knew the land better than most, often venturing out to track game or monitor wildlife populations. Hunting for him was both a passion and a test of endurance, one that demanded patience and respect for nature's power. That morning, Emil set out with his longtime friend and fellow hunter, Jarek Novak, a 41-year-old farmer who had grown up near the mountain foothills. The two men had hunted together many times before and trusted each other completely. They carried rifles, small packs, and enough supplies for a full day in the field. The late autumn fog was thick, curling low over the treetops and hiding the shapes of the hills. The river they followed ran fast and cold, its surface breaking into white foam over scattered rocks. Their goal was to track a group of wild boars known to move between the forest and the riverbank. Signs of rooting and torn earth marked their path, and the men moved quietly through the undergrowth, boots sinking into soft mud. Each step echoed faintly beneath the steady sound of rushing water. The forest felt alive yet eerily silent, the fog swallowing every distant sound. After an hour of tracking, they reached a wide bend in the river. The water was waist-deep in the center, but the far side looked shallower. The men decided to cross where the current seemed calmest. Emil stepped forward first, testing the slick stones beneath the surface while Jarek followed behind, watching the ripples spread in widening circles. The cold water reached their knees as they carefully edged forward. Without warning, a heavy rustle erupted from the opposite bank. A massive wild boar, dark and thick-bodied, burst from the brush. Its tusks gleamed, and its coarse fur bristled as it let out a low grunt. The animal weighed well over 400 pounds and moved with startling speed. It had caught the scent of bait and the faint trace of human sweat carried by the wind. Emil slipped on a slick stone, losing his footing as the current pulled him sideways. His rifle nearly dropped from his grip as icy water splashed across his chest. Jarek raised his weapon and fired a warning shot into the air, but the sound only enraged the boar further. The beast lowered its head and charged into the river, sending waves splashing high as it closed the distance. Emil struggled to regain balance, but the rocks beneath him shifted, and the animal's growl grew louder through the fog. The enormous boar surged through the cold current, sending waves crashing against the hunters. Its tusks gleamed as it pushed forward with unstoppable force. Emil struggled to rise, but his boot slipped again on the slick rocks, and the river pulled at his legs. The animal reached him in seconds, grunting and snorting, its hooves splashing mud and water in every direction. With one heavy swing of its head, the boar's tusks grazed Emil's arm, tearing through fabric and skin before slamming him against a boulder near the bank. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs, and pain shot through his body. Jarek moved fast, his instincts taking over. He threw his rifle strap over his shoulder and reached for a long branch lying near the river's edge. He waved it high, shouting and stomping to draw the boar's attention away from Emil. The animal turned, foam dripping from its mouth, its eyes fixed on the movement. It lunged toward Jarek, crashing through the water, leaving a trail of foam and churned mud behind. The branch snapped in half as Jarek struck the animal's snout, but the distraction worked. Emil, bleeding and gasping, used all his strength to crawl toward the far bank. The current pulled hard, but adrenaline drove him forward. He dragged himself across the last stretch of water and collapsed on the opposite side, coughing and shaking. The boar stomped the ground, huffing and pacing in the shallows, its heavy breath forming white clouds in the mist. After a few tense seconds, it turned away, vanishing back into the trees as suddenly as it had appeared. The forest grew still again, leaving only the sound of rushing water and the hunter's labored breathing. Jarek waded across carefully to reach Emil, who was pale and trembling, but alive. He tore part of his shirt to wrap around the bleeding arm and helped his friend sit upright. The cold air bit at their faces, but neither spoke. The shock of what had just happened held them silent. Once Emil was steady enough to walk, they began moving slowly downstream towards safer ground, keeping close to the edge of the forest. By late afternoon, they reached a ranger outpost where they received medical aid. The wound on Emil's arm was deep but not life-threatening. Wildlife officers later confirmed that large boars in the region often become aggressive during the late autumn feeding period, especially when startled near rivers. The incident changed how both men viewed the hunt. They returned home with torn gear and bruises, carrying the memory of how quickly calm could turn to chaos. In the days that followed, Emil often thought about the moment the water, the fog, and the beast had all come together in a single, terrifying instant. A reminder that in the wild, danger waits where you least expect it. It was September 24, 2024, in the wild heart of Alaska, where wide rivers curved through valleys of pine and fog. The air was crisp and damp, filled with the steady sound of running water and the faint cry of distant birds. Logan Pierce, a 41-year-old outdoorsman from Anchorage, and his longtime friend Carter Hensley, aged 39, had spent the early morning hunting along a remote stretch of river. Both were experienced, with years of guiding and tracking behind them. Logan worked as a wildlife surveyor during the warmer months, while Carter was a park ranger familiar with the dangers of the Alaskan backcountry. They had driven deep into the forest the night before, following an old logging road until it ended at the riverbank. Their small pickup truck carried everything they needed: rifles, packs, and supplies for the day. The early hunt had gone well. By mid-morning, they had successfully tracked and taken down a large bull elk. The men set to work carefully, field dressing it near the edge of the water, knowing they had to finish before the meat spoiled or attracted unwanted attention. Mist hovered low over the river, wrapping the trees in a white haze. The only sounds were the scrape of knives and the gentle current lapping at the bank. Logan and Carter worked quickly, but with care. Their movements were practiced from years of experience. Yet, neither man noticed the faint shifting of branches deeper in the trees, nor the heavy scent of blood drifting through the air. Far beyond their line of sight, a massive Kodiak grizzly, weighing well over 1,000 pounds, had picked up the smell. It moved silently through the undergrowth, its thick coat wet with dew, its muscles rippling with each slow step. To the bear, the scent meant food, an easy opportunity before the long winter months ahead. As the hunters leaned over the elk, the quiet broke apart in an instant. The bear erupted from the forest with a deep, thunderous roar that echoed across the valley. Carter froze where he stood, his hands still gripping the knife. Logan spun around, eyes wide, as the enormous shape charged through the brush. In seconds, it closed the distance. The animal struck with brutal force, one paw raking across Carter's shoulder, sending him crashing into the ground. Logan stumbled backward as the bear's momentum carried it forward, claws scraping his leg and tearing through his pants. The air filled with shouts, gunfire, and the sound of breaking branches as the hunters fought to survive the sudden assault on the riverbank. Logan's rifle kicked hard against his shoulder as he fired a quick shot into the grizzly's left side. The sound shattered the fog-covered silence, echoing through the trees. The heavy animal let out a deep growl, stumbling for only a second before rearing up again, towering over them. Carter struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His jacket was torn wide open, and the dark red stains spread quickly down his arm. Logan could feel his leg throbbing from the gash where the claws had struck him, but he knew he had no time to think about pain. The grizzly moved forward again, teeth bared and eyes burning with fury. Logan and Carter backed toward the river, shouting and waving their arms, trying to appear larger. The bear stopped just a few feet away, its chest heaving, its breath steaming in the cold air. Logan fired another round into the ground near its paws. The sharp noise and flying dirt startled the animal for a brief moment. It turned its head, confused, then swiped at the air before stepping back. The growls echoed like thunder, but the hesitation gave the men a narrow chance. Logan grabbed Carter's arm, helping him move through the thick mud toward their pickup parked farther up the bank. Each step was slow and painful, the slippery ground pulling at their boots. Behind them, the grizzly let out another loud roar, shaking the trees around it. The sound pushed them forward faster, their hearts pounding as they stumbled across fallen branches and wet rocks. Logan turned once, firing a final warning shot into the air. The bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, pacing in frustration. After a few tense seconds, it lowered its head and disappeared back into the brush, its dark shape fading into the fog that hung over the trees. The two men reached the truck, gasping for air. Carter collapsed near the tailgate, clutching his shoulder, while Logan checked the rifle again, afraid the bear might return. The forest had gone silent again, except for the steady rush of the river nearby. When the danger seemed to pass, Logan helped his friend into the passenger seat and drove toward the main trail, every bump in the road making them both wince in pain. Hours later, they reached a small ranger station where medical teams treated their wounds. Carter's shoulder required several stitches while Logan's leg was cleaned and wrapped. Both were lucky to be alive. Wildlife officers arrived at the site the next day, finding deep claw marks near the river and tracks that disappeared into the forest. They confirmed it was a large Kodiak male drawn by the smell of fresh meat. In the following days, the story spread among nearby hunting communities. Officials reminded hunters to remain alert while dressing game in the open, especially near rivers where bears often travel. Logan and Carter both returned home with lasting scars and a renewed respect for Alaska's wilderness. What had begun as a quiet morning hunt had turned into a harsh reminder of nature's power. Even experienced hunters, surrounded by years of skill and caution, could find themselves seconds away from becoming prey. The memory of that foggy riverbank would stay with them for life, a place where survival came down to instinct, courage, and luck. It was December 4th, 2021, deep in the frozen wilderness of eastern Montana, where the jagged hills of the Badlands stretched endlessly beneath a pale winter sky. The air was dry and sharp, filled with drifting snow that moved like smoke across the ridges. Jake Turner, a 39-year-old hunter from Billings, adjusted his pack as he trudged through the knee-deep snow. He had hunted for over 2 decades and was known among friends for his precision and calm under pressure. For him, the Badlands were both familiar and humbling, a place where every step tested endurance and focus. His hunting partner, Marcus Dean, followed a few yards behind. At 42, Marcus had spent most of his life guiding trips across Montana's rugged terrain. He preferred the cold months when the land felt empty and quiet. Together, the two men had tracked elk, deer, and antelope for years. They shared a quiet understanding built on trust and experience, the kind that could only come from long hours spent side by side in the wilderness. That morning, they were after a mature pronghorn buck, known for its size and speed. Snow covered the open plains, broken only by patches of dry brush and dark cliffs. The ground beneath their boots was slick with frost, and each step crunched softly in the silence. Their breath formed small clouds as they moved uphill, rifles slung across their shoulders. Both carried .270 Win rifles, reliable weapons built for precision in wide, open country. The pronghorn herd had left a trail of fresh prints across the frozen ground. Jake crouched to study them, tracing the hoof marks that led toward a ridge ahead. The morning wind was harsh, stinging their faces and numbing their fingers even through insulated gloves. They moved carefully, avoiding sudden noise that could alert the herd. The snow-covered slope offered little cover, and the sound of boots scraping rock echoed faintly through the valley. After nearly an hour of climbing, they reached the edge of a small ridge that overlooked a narrow basin below. Through the haze of snow and distance, Jake spotted the herd, dozens of pronghorns grazing near scattered sagebrush. Their white coats blended with the snow, but their movement gave them away. The hunters knelt, steadying themselves for a better look. Then the silence broke. As Marcus adjusted his footing, a dry branch beneath the snow snapped sharply. The sound cut through the air like a crack of thunder. Instantly, the lead buck lifted its head, ears pointed, eyes wide. Within seconds, the entire herd reacted. The pronghorns bolted as one, muscles flashing beneath their fur as they exploded into a full-speed run. The ridge trembled beneath the thundering hooves. Jake barely had time to rise before the stampede surged across the frozen slope. Snow and ice flew in every direction, filling the air with white haze. The herd moved like a living wave, wild and unstoppable, sweeping toward them through the storm. The herd rushed forward in a blur of snow and movement, the sound of hooves echoing across the frozen ridge. Jake turned to move aside, but the animals were already upon them, charging in blind panic. The air filled with the sharp scent of frost and earth as the ground shook under their combined weight. Marcus shouted for Jake to get clear, but the sound was swallowed by the chaos around them. A young antelope crashed directly into Jake, knocking him backward with sudden force. His rifle slipped from his hands as his body hit the icy slope, sliding fast toward a deep snow gully. He tumbled into the drift, snow exploding around him as sharp shards of frozen brush tore at his coat. Pain spread through his arm and side where the impact had struck. He tried to regain his footing, but the slope was slick and steep. The herd continued to race overhead, scattering across the valley, their hooves cutting deep into the crusted snow. Marcus, still standing near the ridge, fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the storm, echoing across the white expanse. The animals veered, breaking their path and spreading out across the open plain. For a few moments, all that could be heard was the fading rhythm of hooves and the whistle of the cold wind. Marcus rushed down toward the gully, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He reached Jake, who was half buried in snow, shaking from both cold and shock. Blood marked his sleeve where the rough ice had cut through. Together they climbed to safer ground, their boots slipping on the uneven rocks. The temperature dropped further, and the wind grew stronger, numbing their fingers. When the last of the herd disappeared into the distance, silence returned to the ridge. The once still landscape now looked torn apart. Tracks scattered in every direction, the snow churned and broken. Both men stood still, their faces pale, realizing how quickly control could vanish in the wild. Even prey animals, normally timid and light-footed, had the power to cause destruction when startled. They gathered their gear and started back toward their vehicle several miles away. Each step through the deep snow felt heavier than the last. Jake's arm ached and frostbite tingled at the edge of his fingers. Marcus checked their direction constantly, using the faint outline of distant hills as a guide. The storm clouds thickened above them, and snow began to fall again in slow, heavy flakes. Hours later, they reached their truck and started the heater to thaw their frozen hands. Jake cleaned the shallow wounds on his arm while Marcus examined the torn straps on their packs. Both men were silent, lost in thought. The hunt that had begun as a simple winter pursuit had turned into a reminder of how small humans could feel against the power of nature. Over the following days, Jake's bruises darkened and the soreness in his arm lingered. Yet the memory of that sudden stampede stayed strongest. The sight of motion in white fog, the deafening thunder of hooves, and the helplessness that came with it. From that winter onward, both hunters carried with them a deeper respect for the unpredictable side of the wild, where even silence could turn into danger in a single breath. It was October 6, 2024, in the high wilderness of British Columbia, where the sharp air carried the scent of pine and stone. The cliffs stretched above deep valleys, their edges broken by loose rocks and narrow ledges. Sean McAllister, a 40-year-old hunter from Alberta, had spent most of his life exploring Canada's wildest regions. He worked as a forestry guide during the warmer months and hunted game during autumn. His passion for the outdoors came from his grandfather, who had taught him how to track, read animal signs, and move carefully across difficult ground. Sean valued patience and discipline more than anything, traits that had kept him safe in places where nature showed little mercy. That morning, Sean set out before sunrise with his hunting dog, Max, a loyal German shepherd trained to follow scent and alert him to nearby animals. They climbed through dense spruce forest until they reached the upper ridges, where the land opened into steep cliffs overlooking the valley below. The air was cold and damp, and a thin fog wrapped around the peaks, drifting across the rocky ledges like smoke. Sean carried a .300 Win Mag rifle, its weight familiar against his shoulder, and moved slowly, testing each step on the narrow path. He was tracking elk that had crossed the ridge earlier that week. Their hoofprints marked the soft soil between stones, leading toward the higher ground. The cliffs were dangerous. One wrong step could send a person sliding hundreds of feet below. Sean moved cautiously, his boots pressing into the gravel as Max followed close behind, sniffing and pausing every few steps. The sound of distant wind echoed through the valleys, and the faint call of a hawk drifted through the mist. As Sean reached a narrow outcrop, he crouched low, scanning the fog below. The shapes of trees and rocks faded in and out as the wind shifted. The stillness of the moment was broken when Max stopped suddenly, his ears standing upright. A faint rumble came from below the ridge, followed by the sound of claws scraping stone. Through the white curtain of fog, a black bear appeared. Its fur was slick from moisture, and its dark form blended into the rocky slope. The bear had likely been resting among the boulders and was startled by Sean's movement above. It rose on its hind legs, grunting, and then dropped down again, moving toward him with heavy, deliberate steps. Sean froze, gripping his rifle tightly. The ledge beneath him was barely wide enough for steady footing. The bear lunged upward, its claws striking against the stone, sending small rocks tumbling down the slope. Sean stumbled back, trying to keep his balance as the edge crumbled slightly under his boots. The animal's growl filled the air, deep and sharp, echoing across the canyon walls. In that instant, Sean aimed his rifle but hesitated. The power of the weapon could protect him, but the recoil on unstable ground might send him off the cliff. His heart pounded as the bear advanced, its dark shape growing larger through the mist, and Max began barking from a nearby ledge, his voice cutting through the cold air. The echo of Max's barking cut sharply through the fog as Sean steadied himself on the ledge. The bear stopped for a moment, turning its head toward the sound. Its growl deepened, vibrating through the cold mountain air. Sean took a slow step backward, his boots slipping slightly on loose stones. The drop behind him stretched down hundreds of feet, hidden by mist. The animal moved closer, its claws scraping the rock as it climbed. Sean's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He lifted the rifle again, finger hovering over the trigger, but the thought of losing his footing held him still. Max leapt onto a nearby ledge, barking with a fury Sean had never heard before. The dog's noise filled the narrow ridge, echoing off the cliffs and startling the bear. The animal paused, shifting its weight, uncertain. Sean could see its breath forming thick clouds in the freezing air. For a long moment, everything stood still, the hunter, the dog, and the black shape that seemed carved from the mountain itself. Then, with a low snarl, the bear dropped to all fours, backing slowly away toward the trees. Sean stayed frozen, watching as it disappeared into the fog. His hands trembled violently, the rifle still raised, though there was no longer a target. The only sound left was the wind whispering across the rocks. Max whined softly and trotted back to him, brushing against his leg as if to check he was still standing. Sean let out a shaky breath and lowered his weapon, his entire body weak from the surge of fear and relief. He crouched down, steadying himself on the ground. His knees ached, and small cuts from the sharp stones covered his palms. The ledge had shifted beneath his boots during the struggle, and one more step backward might have sent him over the edge. The thought made his stomach tighten. Slowly, he began to make his way back towards safer ground, calling for Max to stay close. Each movement felt heavier. The memory of the bear's dark eyes burned into his mind. It took nearly an hour to descend the ridge, moving carefully through wet moss and loose gravel. When Sean finally reached the lower forest, the air felt thicker and warmer. He sat beside a fallen log, letting Max rest at his side while he caught his breath. The weight of what had happened began to settle on him. He had faced bears before, but never this close, never on terrain so dangerous. Later that evening, as he returned to camp, Sean cleaned his scrapes and checked his rifle. The silence of the woods pressed in around him, broken only by the crackle of the fire. He thought about how close he had come to falling or being struck again. It was not the size of the predator that made the moment terrifying. It was how quickly calm could turn into chaos. In the following days, Sean told other hunters in the area what had happened. Many were surprised that a black bear, usually shy, had reacted so aggressively. Wildlife officers explained that sudden movement on a narrow ledge could easily startle an animal, especially one cornered with no clear escape. Sean kept that lesson close. From then on, he made sure never to hunt alone on steep ridges again. When he looked at Max lying by the fire that night, he knew it was his companion's courage that had saved him from the mountain's edge. It was March 6, 2019, along the banks of a wide, muddy river in the Northern Territory of Australia. The morning air was thick with humidity, and a gray mist clung low to the water, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. Insects buzzed through the still air, and the distant call of birds echoed from the mangroves. Alex Turner, a 39-year-old hunter from Darwin, stood beside his longtime friend Marcus Reed, a 41-year-old field guide and wildlife tracker. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen, used to the harsh and unpredictable wilds of northern Australia. They had spent years hunting and studying the region's wildlife, but this trip was different. They were after a massive saltwater crocodile that had been sighted near a cluster of fishing camps farther upstream. Alex had a deep respect for nature and prided himself on precision and patience. Marcus, on the other hand, was known for his courage and instinct. The two made a reliable team, balancing caution with confidence. That morning they moved carefully through the swampy forest, rifles slung over their shoulders. Each step made the wet ground suck at their boots, and the smell of mud and decay filled the air. The recent rains had turned the paths into slick trails where every movement required focus. They rode small, all-terrain vehicles along the riverbank, stopping often to scan the water for movement. The crocodile they were tracking was said to be enormous, large enough to drag a full-grown bull into the river. The sun began to break through the clouds, sending flashes of light across the brown surface of the water. Both men dismounted and continued on foot, their Ruger Hawkeye .416 rifles held at the ready. The sound of frogs and splashing fish surrounded them as they stepped closer to the edge. The mud under their waders was deep and sticky, pulling at their legs. Marcus led the way, his eyes scanning the shallows for ripples or bubbles. The surface looked calm, but in these rivers, danger often hid just beneath. Then, without warning, the water exploded. A massive crocodile burst upward from the shallows, its jaws wide, teeth flashing white against the brown spray. It struck with terrifying speed, aiming straight for Marcus's legs. The force of the lunge threw mud and water high into the air. Marcus stumbled backward, his boots sinking deeper into the mud as he tried to pull free. Alex reacted instantly, raising his rifle and firing a shot at the beast's shoulder. The recoil echoed across the river, and the bullet tore into the reptile's rough skin. The crocodile hissed, twisting violently, its tail sweeping across the bank and splattering mud in every direction. Marcus fell, one leg caught in the thick sludge, reaching for his knife as the animal turned again, ready to strike. Marcus pushed against the mud with all his strength, trying to pull his leg free as the massive crocodile thrashed in the water only a few feet away. Its tail swung again, striking the riverbank and sending waves of muddy water splashing over him. The sound of the creature's growls mixed with the heavy beating of his heart. Marcus's hands trembled as he gripped his knife, the blade slick with water and grit. He swung at the thick tail as it passed, landing a shallow cut that made the animal twist sharply toward him again. Alex reloaded his rifle quickly, his hands steady despite the chaos. The reptile surged forward once more, jaws wide and powerful enough to crush bone. Alex fired again, hitting the animal in the side just above its front leg. The shot rang through the air, echoing across the river and into the trees. This time, the force of the impact made the beast flinch and turn. It thrashed wildly, sending clumps of mud and grass flying before sliding backward into the shallows. Marcus scrambled toward the overturned ATV, coughing and gasping. The mud beneath him shifted with every movement, making it hard to stand. He could feel cuts burning along his arms where sharp sticks and rocks had scraped him. Alex stepped forward cautiously, rifle raised, watching the surface for any sign of the animal's return. For a few moments, the river was still again, except for the soft ripples where the crocodile had vanished. Both men stayed frozen, waiting. The smell of wet earth hung heavy around them. Finally, bubbles rose to the surface farther downstream, and the faint shape of the massive reptile slipped away beneath the brown water. Its tail disappeared last, cutting a slow wave across the surface before vanishing completely. The forest fell quiet except for the sound of insects and dripping rain. Alex lowered his weapon and went to help his friend. Marcus's shirt was torn, his skin covered in scratches and mud. His breathing was shallow but steady. Together they turned the ATV upright and checked their gear, both shaken by how fast the attack had unfolded. They had come expecting a careful hunt, not a fight for survival. The drive back to camp was slow. The trails were slippery and both men were soaked and exhausted. When they reached the small base near the edge of the forest, other hunters helped them clean the wounds and tend to their bruises. Though Marcus's injuries were not life-threatening, the deep gashes on his leg would leave scars. In the days that followed, wildlife officers investigated the site and confirmed that a large saltwater crocodile had been living in that section of the river for years. Locals were warned to avoid the area until the animal moved farther downstream. Reports described it as one of the largest seen in recent seasons. Alex and Marcus both chose to take a long break from hunting after that day. They realized that even the most skilled and prepared outdoorsman could never fully predict nature's power. The memory of the river, the mud, and the sudden rush of movement stayed with them, a reminder that in the wild, every step carries a risk.